My name is Helen. I was just 18 when my father told me I had to marry a man named George. George was much older than me. He was a cowboy. He had a hard face, brown boots, and cold eyes. I had never spoken to him before. I did not love him. I did not even like him. But in our small town, I had no voice. My father shook hands with George and said, "She is yours now." I felt like a cow sold at the market. I wanted to cry, but I stayed quiet. My hands were cold and my legs felt weak. That was the day my life changed. We were married the next morning. There were no flowers, no music, no friends. Just George, me, and the man from the church. I wore a plain dress. My eyes stayed on the ground. George didn't smile. He didn't hold my hand. He just said yes and walked out. After the wedding, he took me to his house outside the town. It was old and lonely, with broken chairs and dust everywhere. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed. I was scared. My heart beat fast. I didn't want to be near him. He looked at me with dark, heavy eyes. I will never forget that night. Never. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the sun. When morning came, I made tea. George didn't say thank you. He just drank it and left. I sat at the table alone, listening to the wind. My eyes felt dry, but my heart was wet with tears. Day after day, I cooked, cleaned, and stayed quiet. I had no one to talk to. No one came to see me. George never asked how I felt. He never smiled at me. He never cared. If you are still reading, I hope you can feel her pain. Please like, comment, and subscribe if this story touches you. I hope it helps someone feel less alone. In town, people looked at me but said nothing. Some women whispered behind my back. I knew what they thought. "She is just a girl," they said. "He took her like a thing." But no one helped me. I went to the market once a week. George gave me a small coin and told me to come back fast. I walked slowly, hoping to stay away longer. Sometimes I stood near the river and just listened. That soft water was my only friend. It was quiet. It didn't ask anything from me. It just flowed. I wished I could be like that water, free, fast, far away. At night, I cried into my pillow, but I made no sound. George hated noise. He said, "This is my house. You do what I say." I cooked his food. I washed his clothes. But still, he looked at me like I was nothing. One evening, I saw him with a glass in his hand. He drank more than usual. His steps were heavy. His voice was loud. That night, I felt something cold in the air. I didn't know yet that worse days were coming, but deep inside, I could feel it. I was no longer just lonely. I was now also afraid. The days after that cold night were worse. George came home angry almost every evening. He said the cows were slow. He said the sun was too hot. He said I was too quiet. Nothing made him happy. I tried to cook better, clean more, speak softer, but it didn't matter. One night, he came in with dirt on his shirt and a bottle in his hand. He kicked off his boots, looked at me, and said, "Why are you just standing there?" I froze. My hands were shaking. I tried to speak, but my voice was too small. He walked over, fast and hard, and slapped me across the face. I fell to the floor. My cheek burned. My heart broke. That was the first time, but not the last. From then on, I never felt safe. I counted every footstep outside the door. I listened for the sound of his boots. If he came home quiet, I felt lucky. If he came home angry, I knew pain was coming. Sometimes he hit me with his hand. Sometimes he threw things at me. My arms were black and blue, but I hid them under long sleeves. I told no one. Who would listen? Who would believe a girl like me in a town like this? One afternoon, I went to the market. My eye was still red from the night before. I kept my head down and walked slowly. I picked up some apples and handed the man a coin. Just then, I heard a soft voice behind me. "You dropped something," he said. I turned and saw a young man with light brown hair and kind eyes. He held out a small coin. I didn't drop it, but I took it. "Thank you," I said very quietly. He smiled. "I haven't seen you before," he said. "What's your name?" I wanted to lie, but I was too tired. "Helen," I whispered. His name was Steve. He worked at the stables near the church. He was only 20, just 2 years older than me. His smile was soft. His voice was warm. He didn't look at me the way other men did. He didn't ask questions. He just smiled. I said nothing more and walked away. But for the first time in many weeks, I felt something new. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was light, like the first sun after a long storm. That night, George was quiet, but not kind. He sat on the porch and drank for hours. I sat in the kitchen, holding a cup of cold tea, staring at the door. I thought about Steve. Just his name made me feel safe. But I knew I could never see him again. Not in that town. Not as George's wife. I went to bed and tried to sleep. I couldn't. My body hurt. But worse than that, my heart was tired. The next day, I saw Steve again. I didn't plan to. He was walking down the street as I came out of the shop. He stopped and smiled. "You okay?" he asked gently. I didn't answer, but my eyes did. He looked at my face, at the purple skin near my eye. His smile faded. "If you ever need help," he said, "I'm always around." Then he walked away, just like that. No pressure, no loud words, just soft care. That night I didn't cry. Not because I was okay, but because I had a small hope inside me now, a name, a place, a maybe. The days passed. George grew colder. He started locking the door from the outside when he left, like I was not his wife, but his prisoner. I stopped going to town. He said I was too slow and too soft. I sat at home, watching the dust dance in the air. I thought of my mother. She had died when I was young. I wished she was here. I wished someone was here. Then one night something changed. George came home late. He was angry. I didn't ask why. I never did. But this time, he threw his glass across the room. It hit the wall and broke. "You think you can just sit here all day?" he yelled. "You think this is a free life?" He came close. I stepped back. "Please," I whispered. He raised his hand, but this time, I ran. I ran to the other side of the room and grabbed my coat. I didn't think. I just moved. I opened the door and ran out into the dark. I ran through the dark fields behind the house with no shoes, only my coat over my nightdress. The cold wind touched my face, but it didn't stop me. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. I had nothing in my hands, nothing in my pockets. But I felt free for the first time. The sky was quiet. The stars looked down at me, almost like they knew. Every step I took away from that house felt like a step back into myself. I could still hear George's voice in my head, angry and loud, but it was behind me now, far behind. My legs hurt, my chest burned, but I kept going. The town was still. Only one lamp was on near the stable. I knew that place. Steve worked there. I didn't know if he would be there, but I had nowhere else to go. My fingers were cold as I knocked on the back door. For a moment, nothing happened. I was ready to turn away. But then I heard footsteps. The door opened and Steve stood there, shirt loose, hair messy. He looked at me and froze. He didn't ask why I was there. He just stepped aside and said, "Come in." Inside it was warm. There was a small fire in the corner. I sat down slowly on a wooden bench near it. I didn't say a word. My hands shook. My lips felt dry. Steve brought me a blanket and placed it around my shoulders. He knelt down in front of me and looked into my eyes. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't need to. He saw the truth on my face. I saw his worry too. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "You're safe now." And I believed him. That night, I slept in a small room behind the stable. Steve stayed outside. He made sure I was warm and locked the door from the inside so no one could come in. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't cry either. I watched the fire until it turned to ash. I thought about what I had done. I had run away. I had broken the rules of the town. I had walked out on my husband. But I felt no guilt, only fear, and under that fear, hope. In the morning, Steve made tea. We sat outside on 2 wooden chairs. The sun was low and the town was just waking up. He didn't ask what happened. He just talked softly about the horses, about how one of them had a baby last week, about how the river was full after the rain. I listened. I let his voice fill the empty space inside me. After a while, I said, "I can't go back." He looked at me and said, "You don't have to." The next few days felt like a secret dream. I stayed in the small room and helped with simple things, feeding horses, sweeping the barn, folding cloths. I wore one of Steve's shirts over my dress. It was too big, but it felt safe. We didn't talk about George. We didn't talk about the town. We just shared small moments. He taught me how to brush a horse's hair. I taught him how to make good tea. He laughed at my stories. I smiled at his jokes. Slowly, my body began to feel less tight. My mind stopped racing. One evening, we sat near the river, away from the eyes of the town. Steve looked at me and said, "You can stay as long as you want. I'm not afraid of anyone." I looked at the water, moving slowly past us. I said, "They'll come looking for me." He nodded. "Then we'll go," he said. "I'll take you far away from here." I wanted to believe him, but I had always lived in fear. I didn't know what life looked like without it. But a few days later, that fear came true. One of George's friends saw me near the stable. I knew the word would reach him. I told Steve. His face turned hard, but his voice stayed soft. "Let's leave tonight," he said. I looked at him. "Where will we go?" I asked. "Somewhere new," he replied. "Somewhere he can't find you. Somewhere you can live without fear." That night, with only a small bag, we took a horse and left the town. We rode for hours under the stars. The road was long, but I felt light. My heart beat fast, not from fear, but from the idea of something better. Steve held the reins. I held the hope. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. We reached a quiet village by morning. It was small and kind. We found a woman who rented out a room. Steve worked at the nearby barn. I helped her cook and clean. Days turned into weeks. The bruises on my skin faded. The heaviness in my chest became lighter. Every morning, I woke up before the sun and watched Steve from the window. He worked with care. He smiled often. I didn't know what love was before, but now I was starting to understand. One evening, we sat under a tree near the house. Steve held my hand for the first time. It was warm, soft, not like George's. He looked at me and said, "I've loved you since the day I saw you at the market." I didn't say it then, but I feel it now. I felt tears in my eyes, not from pain, but from joy. I said, "I never knew love could feel safe." He smiled and said, "Now you do." The next morning, I woke with a sound of birds outside our small room. The light coming through the curtain was soft and golden. I sat up slowly, feeling the warmth on my face. It had been almost 3 months since I left George. 3 months since I ran through the cold night with nothing but my coat. I looked around the little room. There were only a few things inside: a bed, a wooden table, a single chair. But it felt more like home than the big cold house I had once lived in. Steve had already gone to the barn. I could hear his voice outside, talking gently to one of the horses. I smiled. That sound made my heart feel calm. I walked out and saw him standing there, holding a bucket. His shirt was dusty and his boots were muddy, but he looked beautiful to me. He turned when he heard me and smiled. That smile still made my heart skip, even after all this time. "Morning," he said softly. "Sleep well?" I nodded and stepped closer. We didn't speak much, but we didn't need to. His presence said everything. Later that day, while we were eating lunch near the river, Steve looked at me with a quiet seriousness in his eyes. "Helen," he said, "I know life has been hard for you. I can't take your past away, but I can promise you something better, if you'll let me." I looked at him, my hands still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. "It's not much," he said, "but it's real, and so is what I feel for you." I didn't cry, though my eyes filled with water. I just whispered, "Yes," because I knew I wasn't saying yes just to Steve. I was saying yes to a new life, to hope, to love that did not hurt. We didn't plan a big wedding. There was no dress, no flowers, no music. But this time, it was my choice. The woman from the house and her husband stood with us near the big tree by the barn. Steve held my hands and looked straight into my eyes. His voice was clear and soft. He didn't need to say many words. I already knew his heart. When it was my turn to speak, I looked at him and said, "You found me when I was lost. You gave me light when I had only dark. You are my safe place now." After that, the man from the village gave us a kind smile and said, "You are husband and wife." And this time, those words felt true. We walked back hand in hand. The wind was gentle and the sky was open. That night, Steve lit a small fire and we sat beside it, wrapped in one blanket. He made me laugh when he told me how nervous he had been that first day at the market. "I saw you drop that coin," he said with a grin, "but I didn't want the moment to end, so I gave it back late." I laughed, resting my head on his shoulder. "I knew," I said, "but I liked it." Life after that was not always easy, but it was always kind. We worked together each day, saved a little money, and made plans for our future. Some days were slow, some were hard, but none were lonely. The pain I once carried slowly faded into the back of my memory. I no longer feared the sound of boots at the door. I no longer looked over my shoulder. I had been broken before, but now I was whole. I had run through the night with nothing but fear, and now I sat under the sun with everything I needed. Steve never raised his voice. He never made me feel small. He held me when I had bad dreams and made me tea when I felt tired. And I loved him more with each passing day, not for what he gave me, but for who he was. He gave me space to grow. He gave me the freedom to speak. He gave me peace. In that quiet village, far from the dust and anger of my old life, I found something rare. I found love that was gentle, love that healed, love that stayed. Sometimes, at night, we walked near the river where he first promised to keep me safe. We didn't talk much on those walks. The silence between us was full of understanding. I would hold his arm and rest my head against it, feeling his warmth. I would close my eyes and listen to the sound of the water, and in those moments, I would thank the stars, not for giving me an easy life, but for giving me the strength to run and the heart to stay open when love finally came. So now, when I look back at that first night of my marriage to George, I don't cry. Not anymore, because I know that night was not my ending. It was the beginning of the road that led me here, to this place, to this man, to this life, and to the part of me that was always strong, even when I didn't know it. The days turned into seasons. Summer brought warm light and long days. Steve and I worked in the sun, side by side. We were always tired by evening, but it was a good kind of tired. Not from pain or fear, but from building a life together. The stable grew busier, and Steve became the one people trusted most. He fixed broken fences, cleaned stalls, and helped others without needing to be asked. People in the village started to know me too. They stopped looking at me with strange eyes. They smiled when I passed. They called me by name. One afternoon, I was walking through the market when an old woman stopped me. She had white hair and kind eyes. She touched my arm and said, "You look peaceful now." I smiled and thanked her. But when I walked away, I felt my throat tighten. Because she was right. I did look peaceful. But more than that, I felt peaceful inside. For the first time in my life, I felt safe in my skin. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't afraid someone would take everything from me. I had a home, a husband, and most of all, I had myself. Steve and I moved into a small house near the edge of the village. It wasn't big, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen. But it was ours. We painted the walls together. I planted flowers near the window. In the evenings, Steve sat on the steps with his guitar and played while I watched the sky. Sometimes, I still thought about the past, not with pain, but with quiet memory. George was still out there somewhere, maybe angry, maybe lost, but he no longer had a hold on me. I had walked away, and that choice was mine. One cold evening in winter, Steve came home with a surprise. He opened his hand and showed me a small, wooden horse. "I made this," he said, "for our child." I looked at him, confused. Then I smiled. He had known before I told him. I was going to be a mother. I cried when I saw the little horse, not because I was afraid, but because it felt like the final piece of something I never thought I would have. A new life. A child born in love, not fear. The months went by slowly, gently. I grew bigger each day. Steve watched me with wide, happy eyes. He read books about babies. He built a crib with his own hands. Every evening, he talked to my belly and made me laugh. And I felt full, not just in body, but in heart. When the time came, it was a hard birth. I screamed. I cried. I thought I would break. But Steve held my hand the whole time. He didn't let go. And when I heard our baby's first cry, I felt the world go quiet. A boy. Small, soft, with eyes like his father. We named him Daniel. Our home changed after that. It was no longer just a place for sleep and food. It became a place of laughter, of tiny footsteps, of lullabies at night. I sang to Daniel while Steve held him. We watched him grow, day by day, stronger and brighter. He liked to hold my finger while he slept. He liked Steve's voice when he sang. He liked the way the morning light touched the floor. I watched him and thought, this is what life should be. This is what love is meant to build. Years passed like soft pages in a book. I no longer counted the days since I left George. I no longer feared the sound of footsteps. I no longer waited for the past to return, because the past had no place here, not in this house, not in this life. Steve and I grew older, but not tired of each other. We learned how to read each other's silence. We learned how to listen. And most of all, we learned that love isn't made of big things. It's made of quiet moments, gentle words, small kindnesses that never stop. Sometimes, when Daniel was asleep, we sat by the fire and talked about the early days, about the barn, the market, the night I knocked on his door. Steve would say, "I'm glad you ran." And I would say, "I'm glad you opened the door." And we would both smile, because we knew we had found each other in a world that didn't make it easy. We had made a life out of broken pieces, and we had turned it into something whole. This story is mine, but maybe in some way it belongs to someone else too. Someone out there who feels stuck, who feels small, who feels like they have no voice. I want to tell that person, you are not alone. You are not weak. You are not without power. You can leave. You can heal. You can love again, just like I did. I hope you have enjoyed the story. Like and comment if you want to hear more soon.